Klappe auf, Klappe zu. I shouldn't just... Okay. To there?
That's for me.
So my name is Antje Southern, and I was born in Frankfurt in West Germany, and left there 25 years ago to come and live in London.
Okay. Could you tell me a bit about your childhood and where you grew up?
Well, I was born and grew up in Frankfurt, which is just right in the middle of Germany. Everybody knows it because of the big international airport. Lots of people flying from America stop there and change. It's on the river Main, and I'm saying this because there's another Frankfurt. If you look at the German map, there's another Frankfurt, which is actually Frankfurt on the Oder, which is another river, and that's sort of northeast Germany, and that used to be actually in the former East Germany.
Okay, so you mentioned you grew up in West Germany. Did you get to visit East Germany?
Yeah, I did get to visit East Germany, and lots of people actually did. Lots of my friends. Clearly Berlin was a very hot city at the time because it was different from all the very sort of well-behaved other German cities. So we went to Berlin, and I also travelled quite into East Germany to see art, because now I'm an art historian, and at the time I was very interested, so I wanted to visit Dresden and see, you know, the fantastic palaces there.
Did anything happen during the journey, or was it difficult?
Well, yeah, it was always a bit of an adventure, these journeys, because you would have to go through Berlin. Berlin was the access point. You know, Berlin was divided by the big wall, so there was East and West Berlin, but Berlin itself, the city, was already in East Germany, and the journey was sort of quite complicated. And in Berlin they had that very, very famous checkpoint where they did very, very serious searches called Checkpoint Charlie. And because what the problem was, and this sort of from now it seems sort of quite implausible, but in the people who lived in East Germany, who were resident in East Germany, were not allowed to cross over into West Germany. And so I could travel in with a special permission, and at Checkpoint Charlie the train would pull in and it would sit there for quite a while, and these very, very scary looking soldiers, military personnel in these sort of weird sort of uniform, would come through and be very serious and go through each compartment. And this was the trains, you know, it wasn't like a big open compartment. Every train had these small compartments with sort of 3 seats on either side opposite each other that opened the door, and the atmosphere was really, really scary, because you think, oh my god, you know, what do they want, and maybe my papers aren't right, because you needed all these sort of the proper passport and visa and so on. And actually much later, when I came again, I travelled with an American friend, and it was totally different. The minute they saw it was an American, they said, fine, go, because they didn't want to look that scary in front of international people. But certainly us West Germans, we were clearly very intimidated by this and felt very scared. And, you know, because they just didn't want us, because, you know, the East German people were so separate and so poor. We always smuggled things through. We smuggled money through, we smuggled some nice food through, and we didn't want them to see that. So of course it was quite scary and but also quite exciting, you know. When I'm sort of 16, 17, it's all quite adventurous as well.
Can you tell me a bit about your experiences in East Germany?
Well, you know, the first time I got there, I was absolutely shocked. You know, I thought I'd stepped through a television set into an old black and white film. And I'd never experienced so much sort of greyness and black and whiteness there. And it was so phenomenally different. You know, I came up out of a big city, with lots of shops and neon lights and advertising and cars in every colour. I mean, you know, hardly anybody in East Germany had a car. Obviously the people from the party the people, you know, the political influence and so on, they had special sort of black cars. And then the population, they had to wait for years and years and years to apply for a little, tiny little car called a trubby, a trabant. And only very few had this. So there were hardly any cars. And the other thing is, what I just thought unbelievable, was there was no advertising, you know, no posters, no nothing, no colour. So the buildings, and there was no money to renovate buildings, so they had lots of sort of high rises, and you know, everything was sort of concrete colour.
What differences did you notice between East and West Germany? What are the differences?
Well, you know, I mean, clearly it's obvious to me now, but obviously not obvious to you because it's so long ago. I think there's, because it's a communist state, so it didn't have an open market. There were no shops in that way. You know, there wasn't any way you could sort of go shopping, or, you know, if you'd go to a supermarket, there's hardly anything there. All the things we expect to be given in a supermarket, like some meat or some eggs or some fruit, nothing was in there. And I know when people knew that oranges came in or something came in, they'd be queuing for hours to get the stuff. And you know, at home, few people had TV, and those who had TV, they weren't allowed to watch Western TV because they didn't want people to be contaminated, you know, to be distracted from the good Eastern German morals of communist living. They didn't want people coming in there with the sort of consumerist attitude we have in the West. And you know, of course, you know, I was amazed there were hardly any shops and hardly any cars, and people would recognize, you know, that I would come from West Germany because I looked very different. Even so, I wore sort of very plain, normal clothes, but you know, they could see that I ate different food, I looked different. So that was quite, you know, very upsetting in a way to see that, and I felt very upset that, you know, people didn't have those chances and the ability to move around freely and have the choice that I grew up with. And I felt very sad, and I felt it was great injustice because it's a divided country, and my parents' friends and my friends and the kids there just couldn't do what I could do, and I suddenly realized it was amazing privilege, you know, I had growing up in the West and not in the East.
Did you know anyone who escaped, and what measures were taken to stop people, or how difficult was it?
How difficult was it? It was very difficult. They built